Welcome to ACVC's latest thesis. Unlike factories, construction is not an ops business. It's a supply chain business, and a complex one. Buffering the supply chains of construction and the inventories associated with it is critical to really optimize a construction project. But the buffering is often suboptimal, and that's exactly where we see a huge untapped opportunity for founders to build a category leader. Get my full thesis coming up now. Hi there. So today in ACVC we talk about the thesis why warehousing for construction is representing an interesting opportunity and why actually nobody that we have seen among venture land is really going after it. So let me start off with the core premise. What you need to understand is that construction is a supply chain business. It's not an operations business. An operations business, for example, real estate management, typically is optimized in different ways. You try to increase the utilization or the uptime of your building, and you try to transact it for the highest amount of possible. So you're trying to basically maximize the efficiency of a static asset, and you do that in a static environment. That's what I call an operations business. It's much closer to a factory that has a standardized shop floor with a standardized model to be repeatedly churned out, and you try to increase the efficiency, the uptime of that. Construction as a supply chain business, in almost all of the cases with exceptions, is not that. As a supply chain business, construction is optimized through organizing the logistics and how they interconnect with each other, the different suppliers, the materials, the equipment around the construction site, because there's one core factor to it. It's a project business. And so as a project business, every project has its own characteristics, not just what kind of facility or building or design or model we're putting in place, that as well, but there's local topology, there's local infill, there are local constraints, there's weather. So all these interdependencies happen under very specific constraints to the specific project. And it's this project-based nature that makes construction a supply chain business, and you optimize it through the supply chains, not through optimizing how you hammer a nail into the wall a million times. So that's a very important premise. But because it's, or in spite of being a supply chain business, construction is anything but just in time. So usually when someone thinks of supply chain, for example, what you learned at business school, when you went there and they teach you supply chain, the one thing people will walk away with is, okay, let me get it just in time, because that's what the automotive supply chains, in the 80s and after, they taught us. But construction is anything but a just in time business. You will actually see a lot of inventory lying around on construction sites wherever you go. Small construction sites can be a mess. Large construction sites, whenever you go, you will actually see large portions of material and inventory lying around. And that is because it's hard to make it a just-in-time business, which this lack of being just in time, it creates operational and commercial issues. So you will have a lot of theft on construction sites, which leads to insurance claims. You will have weathering of materials, which for bulk commodities like steel, that is less of an issue. But for high-end finished or assembled goods, for example, the weathering can be a real issue. So the longer you have it lying around, the more it is exposed to the weather conditions, as well as to theft and risk of theft. They also pose inventory that is lying around. They also pose spatial obstacles, which means that you're touching the same material unnecessarily often, which is a big thing in supply chains you want to eliminate. So the more lies around, the more I will have to actually maneuver it around the construction site as I'm doing other things. And that is a big no-no. You absolutely don't want that, because it creates more interdependencies in an already complex supply chain micro on the site. So you don't want that, right? Which means if you truly want to make the supply chain around construction sites as close to just in time as possible, you will need to avoid all of that inventory lying on site. But because they are highly interdependent, these numbers of sites and the numbers of materials and the numbers of workers and the numbers of subcontractors and the numbers of suppliers, you will always need a buffering just because of the amount of interdependencies. To give you an idea, on an average medium-sized construction site, you will typically have 100 workers present. Around the project, you will typically have 100 different suppliers, from materials as well as equipment, you will typically have up to 100 different subcontractors for different trades, which means if you multiply 100 times 100 times 100, you have a million different combinations of who could handle what, or who could stand in what way, who has to intersect with each other. So it's this amount of complexity in a dumbed down, super simplified way to give you an idea just how interdependent this project-based supply chain of construction is. In an operations business, like automotive, for example, I will have similar complexity, if not higher, but because I can standardize, because it's not a project business, I handle the complexity that way. In construction, that will not happen. And so I need to handle the interdependency differently. And the answer is buffering. I will always have to buffer in the construction supply chain. Today, the buffering is the inventory on the construction side, or it lays around in a truck because it's underway, right? So buffering does happen, but it's suboptimal. Now, the manufacturers and the third-party logistics providers, they will refuse to be the buffer. They won't have it lie around their yard for longer than necessary. It just doesn't work that way. They want to ship it out as quickly as possible because there are cash flows associated with that as well. There's site constraints, but there's cash flows associated with it. So generally your manufacturers and your 3PLs, they want to ship it to your site as quickly as possible. And the contractor will only have a degree of influence here, what happens. And that results in typically the construction site being the buffer. And that's exactly what we want to avoid. Now, before I come to the point about the thesis, how to fix and how to build a business out of being the buffer, just a few more numbers, right? So studies have shown that if you improve the visibility of a construction supply chain, you will improve the whole resilience of the project, meaning its ability to handle disruptions and changes in the interdependent supply chain by up to 25%, which is big for a construction project that is very complex. Typically, a construction project of a medium to large size will have 1 to 2% logistics cost as a percent of the overall project volume. So it's a substantial portion that actually warrants looking into. Now, what studies have shown is that you can achieve a 40% reduction of these logistics costs by optimizing the supply chain, providing better visibility and providing more buffering, which means in terms of the overall project cost and the net margin for the contractor, you can achieve on average, that's not even the top, on average, 0.4 to 0.8 better percentage of the project value as your net margin, which exactly is the opportunity that as a buffer in and around medium to large construction sites you can attack. And so that's my thesis. I would like to see someone that actually builds a outcome as a service type business of being a warehousing provider for construction sites. So in a nutshell, just offer to medium to large contractors and their sites a depot outside of the large metropolitan areas where you don't even need, don't think automation, don't think perfection of doing the warehouse. Just rent a space, be a real estate provider, have it locked up, have it secure, have it not exposed to weathering conditions, and allow the contractor to tell the manufacturers and the 3PLs not to deliver to their construction site, but to deliver it to your warehouse right outside the metropolitan area. And then allow that same contractor via a software to call off the delivery of that inventory a day ahead when they need it. That's exactly, by the way, how ready-mix concrete works. So ready-mix concrete, typically I have to procure it for a large construction site months in advance to block the production capacity, but the delivery window will be known to me very short before, so a day, 2 days before. And then I need to align with the producer, hey, at what point in time tomorrow can you be here? 6:30, 7, and how do we space the different trucks? That's because ready-mix concrete is not a stockable material. It will actually perish after 60 minutes on average once it left the production site. And so that same logic can be applied to this warehousing opportunity where you allow the contractor to call off their inventory from your site, from your depot just outside of the city via a software, and you will then deliver it to the site. So I think with the numbers that I've shown you, for an average project, an average medium to large size project, let's say 100 million project volume, you can easily calculate with 200 to 400,000 of revenue just by being this warehouse And I think that's actually lowballing it, because the contractors won't even want to share the cost saving with you. Most of them want an improved visibility and planability of their supply chain. So I actually think, based on discussions I'm having, they would be happy to give you the entire cost saving as your revenue, as long as that means that their supply chain is much better, which will have lots of adjacent benefits for the contractor. So if you want to be building something like this, please do hit me up. I'm happy to connect you with people who are actively looking for such a solution. Hey guys, thanks for tuning in. Make sure that you subscribe under acvc.com, and you can also find me on LinkedIn. See you next time.